Hello and welcome, guys. So glad you're here. Just an introduction. My name's Isaac. I'm 20 years old, studying science at UCD, phoning in here from God's own country of Wicklow.
Hi guys, my name is Patrick. I'm Isaac's first cousin. We're isolating in the same household together, which is going about a 4 out of 10.
On eggshells at the moment,
Yeah,
but
we said that last week.
still on eggshells.
Still on eggshells. My name's Patrick. I spent 4 years studying philosophy and theology at university. I'm now a history and religion teacher, and I love getting my teeth into the big questions of life. So I'm delighted to be here today. Welcome back. If you were here 2 weeks ago, it's great to have you back. And if you're here for the first time, welcome as well.
Totally. So glad you guys are here. Now, finding hope in a time of uncertainty and fear. Tell you what, guys, our world surely is full of uncertainty and fear. I tell you what, I can't even look forward to 2 weeks' time with any form of kind of sureness or certainty. I truly don't know what the world's looking like now, and I don't know what it's looking like in the future, and I'm sure you guys are the same as well. And we are surrounded by fear. It's the fear of the unknown, the fear of corona, the fear of recession, the fear of death. Tell you what, guys, if coronavirus isn't making you start to question and grapple with the bigger and deeper questions of life, then I really don't know what is. And so, guys, with that said, I encourage you, come along to this event now with an open mind, and let's be active, let's engage, and let's see what we can get out of this evening. And now, just as a brief kind of outline of what it's going to look like, soon we're going to hand you over to our friend Katie, and she's going to be giving a bit of a personal story about how she finds hope in this trying time. And then after that, we're going to hand over to Steve. Now, that's going to be at about 20 past. And Steve, if you remember, if you were here last time, is the guy who did the talk as well last time. So if you remember him, say hello. And he's going to be talking about what the Bible has to say about finding hope. And it's going to be quite an in-depth look. And so I'm really, really looking forward to that. Then after that, we head into our Q&A, and that's where you guys get involved. Now, there's only one rule for tonight. No question is too simple, and no question is too feisty. So guys, if you have any questions, whether it be simple, feisty, or anywhere in between, send your questions in. And now there's a whole bunch of different ways you could be sending your questions in. You could send a message straight onto Zoom in the chat pane here. Additionally, you could send us a message on Instagram, at Twitter, at Intro Dublin. And if you want to send us an anonymous message, then you can also send us a text, and you can see that phone number on the top right of your screen there as well.
Great. So, Isaac, just be clear now. So if someone has a question in the middle of Steve's talk and they want to send it in, if they stick it in the Zoom chat, does Steve stop there and then and answer the question?
No, so we're going to be compiling all those questions, and we're going to do that at the end. So if you have a question at any point, don't hold on to it. Send it in straight away.
Great. Isaac, we got a little bit of feedback from last week.
Yes.
Just before we get going. So thank you so much to everyone who sent in questions last week. There were a few questions we didn't get to. So we had one person text in and say that Isaac Phillips looks and talks a lot like the famous satirical character Ali G. And it asked, are you Sacha Baron Cohen in disguise as a Christian?
That truly is an interesting question. Any idea who asked that one?
Anonymous source.
No, you can't say.
It's just a friend.
Holding the questions a bit.
Just, I think it's the glasses.
Yeah.
You're
just asking for a friend, are you? That's interesting actually, because I think we all got a bit of feedback about you as well. Now, if you were on the call last time, then you would have become a bit familiar to a constant, incessant tapping on the table. And guys, we looked into it and we figured out it really was Patrick tapping his pen on the table. Now, Pat, what was that about? Like, are you nervous?
I'm not
scared?
No, I'm not nervous.
Not getting enough exercise in the day? Are you scared?
I'm not nervous.
I tell you what, these are nice guys.
I'm not nervous. I find that you speak very slowly and almost quite monotonously, so I'm trying to sort of hurry you up and make an extra.
Interesting. It's very effective. It's very effective.
Let's set the scene. Let's move on.
Very good.
So let's set the scene for tonight. Slightly more serious. We've got two big themes tonight: fear and uncertainty, and hope. And can the two coexist? Let's talk about fear and uncertainty. how is that manifesting itself in your life at the moment? Are you experiencing fear? Are you experiencing uncertainty?
Totally. You know, like as we all, I'm sure, like all of us, I have elderly grandparents. Particularly, I have a granddad living right in the centre of Dublin, and that is scary. You know, not knowing what's going on with him, and you know, he is vulnerable, and that fear of like, if he gets coronavirus, what happens? And of course, then you also have that uncertainty of like, well, do I have coronavirus? There is that 3-day incubation period, and so it just feels like you're a ticking time bomb every time you touch like the new groceries and stuff like that. It really is crazy time. How about you?
Yeah, I have a lot of uncertainty in my life at the moment, perhaps more than ever. Myself and my fiance, were meant to be getting married on June the 26th. Big wedding, lots of people, everything we'd ever dreamed of, saved up for it, that sort of shebang. And that's obviously not really going to happen. We still hope we're going to have a ceremony. It's not clear at the moment in the UK or in Northern Ireland anyway. Weddings are illegal and it's all it's all a mess. I don't know what's going to happen. And we were so looking forward to it. And we just don't know what's going to happen now. So definitely a lot of uncertainty. I don't know when I'm going to begin this next stage of life, what it's going to look like. Yeah. And listen, I have to remind myself, there are a lot of people having it a lot tougher than us. There's no doubt about that. There's a lot of people experiencing death itself, and that is awful, and that is tragic. So, yeah. In the midst of all the fear and uncertainty, and there is some, how do you find hope?
Well, it's interesting, you know, like there really are still quite a few good news stories going on as well. Particularly, I think back to, we have a family friend named Berkey, and he's particularly good a friend with my grandma. And he got coronavirus, he got quite ill, even got into ICU. And then eventually his family even got called in to go say, you know what, you need to say goodbye, he's gone, we can't do anything more to save him. And now fast forward a couple of weeks, he's back home now and recovering perfectly fine. And that really is so encouraging to see. And incidentally, as you know, as a family group, we were praying for him. And of course, we'll never know if that actually did make an impact or not. But of course, it really is a big encouragement.
Yeah.
How about you?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned prayer. I think I saw an article on the BBC a couple of days ago saying in the UK, sure that's not Ireland, but perhaps it's similar here. In the UK at the moment, 44% of people are saying that they're praying regularly or even daily, which is way more than normal. And so I think I find hope, and I just wonder, is God doing something in all of this? Is he somehow moving? Is somehow society changing? Are people turning their thoughts back to him? And that just gives me a little nugget of hope in the gloom that maybe there's a big shift going on. 44%, that's a lot. That's a lot. Now, listen, some of you here today might react against that and say, well, nonsense, how can you still believe in God all this time? Isn't this doing the opposite? Isn't this proving that God doesn't exist at all, that we're just random creation and a virus can sweep through and cause suffering and no one's in control? So if you are thinking that, it's great to have you. It's great to have people from a wide spectrum, and we look forward to getting our teeth into some of these issues. But let's get on with the real business. People have put up with us long enough.
Totally. And so, of course, we're talking about hope. And guys, we'd love to be hearing what you guys have to say about hope as well. So there's a hashtag Spread Hope Challenge, still at its early start of its life. And guys, you know, we'd love to see you guys get involved in this as well. 60 seconds, where are you finding hope? And now, a little bit more than 60 seconds, we're going to hand over to our very good friend, Casey, and she's going to be giving us a personal story of faith, where she's finding hope in this crazy time. And now Katie's going to be on the panel for the Q&A at the end as well. So guys, if you have a question, send it in. Yeah. Right.
Can I just add on that? So to be clear, what we're getting now, we're going to get a little personal story, which is great. And then we're going to get Steve giving the more meat of the evening and addressing 100%. The question at hand. Yeah. Great. Okay, Katie, over to you.
Hi guys, I hope everyone's well. So my name is Katie, and I'll be sharing part of my story with you guys today. So just a little bit about me. I'm from Northern Ireland, but I would usually be living in Dublin for university, where I study history, which is very exciting, and I'm part of Christ City Church as well. And I was brought up in a Christian family, so I've kind of known about God for a lot of my life. But that actually still didn't mean that life was plain sailing for me. So I have a couple of life experiences I'm going to share with you guys today on this theme of hope in a time of uncertainty and fear. But because of my hope as a Christian, I was able to get through these times. So I'll just start off with the first one then. Sorry, there's a big crack down the middle of my laptop, so I can't necessarily see all my words. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to chat about is something that happened when I was 15 and in high school, and I encountered an episode of bullying. Okay, so it all started with, I was dishonest with one of my best friends at the time, which naturally led to us falling out, you know, the way how it is in high school and all that drama. And we weren't speaking for about a week, and then she forgave me and it was all good, until later on a few of our other friends started to get involved, and it essentially resulted in my friendship group of about 10 girls bullying me for the following year as a source of revenge, I would say, for that one girl that I fell out with primarily. So this took many forms, in the way of cyberbullying, taking photos of me in classes, shouting insults near the lockers. It definitely was a period of uncertainty and struggle where I was constantly fearful of coming into school every day. I didn't know what these girls were going to do next, and I didn't see how I was ever going to be able to have friends again or enjoy school or ever gain any self-confidence again. Where I had placed my hope, which was being liked and popular in school, was taken away from me. So I just want to stress that, like, I hold my hand up for the initial acts that did hurt my friend at the time. However, I had apologised from the get-go. We had worked to sort it out. But I do look back and reflect to see how nothing obviously should justify bullying or the degrading of a person. And as a result of this fear, it essentially led to many mental health difficulties for myself, but more specifically, I fell into a period of self-harm, and as I came to believe the lies that I was worthless or a bad person and deserved to feel hurt. So this period in school was detrimental in many ways and has come to affect many parts of my life for a long period of time. And particularly if these feelings of self-worthlessness stayed with me, even though I came to grow in my Christian faith. So I felt stuck, I felt lost, I felt hopeless. But I remember, even though I wasn't practicing my faith as much when I was a teenager, and I didn't really care about reading my Bible, I remember at one point crying out to God and asking him to help me in whatever way possible. So the next day I went into school, and this girl who was involved in the Christian Union invited me along to their Bible study and to hang out with some of her friends. And in that moment, I could see that God had imminently answered my prayer and brought me the hope of friendship in a time of deep uncertainty and anxiousness. And he had revealed to me that even if I couldn't trust anyone else, that didn't matter, because I could trust him and how much he cared for me and loved me no matter what I had done. So as I came to college a couple of years ago in Dublin, these feelings of worthlessness and anxiety were still quite prevalent in many different ways. But I was able to reach out to people within my church here in Dublin who were completely unjudgmental and fully welcoming of what I had to say, and they helped me process these emotions and feelings. The church helped me even further to see the hope that I can have in God, and how God accepts me for who I am and loves me for all the good and bad. One of my favourite verses during that time of being bullied in school was from a book in the New Testament. It's called Philippians. It's in chapter 4, verse 6, and it says, "Do not worry about anything, but pray about everything, and God's peace that transcends all understanding will guard your heart." And those words just really tell me that anything, no matter how big or how small, can be happening in my life, yet God is in control and promises to protect. And I almost imagine him as like a bodyguard standing outside my heart, just like granting me all these inches of hope in the midst of fear. So as a Christian, I certainly still encounter fear and times of trouble, but it is through the promises that God has laid out for us throughout the Bible, and I know I can face those seasons of distress, such as this period of coronavirus, which all of us are fearful in right now. We can face these seasons of distress with this protection from God, as I personally can look back on my life and see how he's faithfully guarded me. So that was been one pivotal time of uncertainty and fear, where I really seen God come in and provide for me there. So then my second point of life experience was just last summer. I had the amazing opportunity to go to Ibiza to serve on a mission trip. Yes, Ibiza and mission trip in the same sentence. It is a real thing. We were able to go and pray for people and care for people in the streets. And we actually seen, I think it was around 10 to 15 people come to faith during that time. It was amazing. So, however, this wonderful new experience was also accompanied with deep uncertainty. As during my first week away, I got some news my granny had become sick and didn't seem to be getting any better. I was super close with my granny. She played a big part in my life. We were always WhatsApping. We'd always be going for coffee when I was home from uni. And so to hear news like this while I was away was really upsetting. And I felt useless as I couldn't do anything to help. So I was away for 2 months in Ibiza while this was occurring, until I got a phone call to say things had worsened and the doctors were unsure of how much longer my granny would have to live. I just always need 2 seconds when I get to this bit, and I'm fine. Thankfully, I was able to fly home and have 2 precious days with my granny before she passed away. Okay, we're good. We're back on track. So my granny was also a Christian, and she'd been a great example of faith to me, so I was able to have hope in that time of sadness and grief, that she was now in a better place, not feeling pain anymore. I remember vividly the moment she passed away. The first emotion I felt wasn't actually sadness, but joy, because I knew she had entered into eternity with God, where there is no more pain or suffering or tears. This hope means that death does not have the final say for those who follow Christ, as the Bible shows us that for those people who believe in Jesus, we will be united with our loved ones again in heaven. And this hope in God allowed me to get through this horrible pain of losing a loved one. Yes, I was still upset. I still am upset, as you can see, and I miss my granny loads. But being a Christian doesn't stop this pain. But I know I can have comfort in knowing the hope that Jesus provides for me. Ultimately, if you know Jesus, you can have hope in the promise of heaven in the midst of uncertainty. When Jesus himself died on the cross, as we looked at in our previous intro session, the Bible tells us that on the cross he defeated all death and is victorious over it all. Then when Jesus rose from the cross, he gave us an even greater reason to have hope, as he showed us the depths of his power and the lengths he was prepared to go to offer us a heavenly hope that promises much more than anything on earth can offer us. This means for people who believe in the power of the cross and the resurrection that we can have hope in a time of uncertainty, such as when our loved ones are ill like my granny, or in a time of fear that we're all experiencing now during coronavirus. So I just want to leave you with a verse from the Bible that I found comforting through in difficult periods, and that you guys might also find uplifting in this time of COVID. It's from a book in the Old Testament called Isaiah in chapter 40, verse 31, and it says, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." So yeah, those are just a couple of examples of my life where there is deep uncertainty and fear, but because I've come to know Jesus, I've come to know God, and I've come to experience the hope that he can provide for us. As a Christian, it's not plain sailing, but we can be comforted through the hope and the promises that God gives us. So yeah, back to Pat and Isaac then.
Katie, thank you very much. That was brilliant, and it takes a lot of courage and gumption to share so personally like that. So Katie, thank you very, very much. Okay, we're now going to hand over to Steve for the main talk of the evening. Steve actually wrote the intro course, so he's done hundreds of these talks in the past, and he works in Dublin city centre. Well, not city centre anymore. He works at home for HubSpot, who are a big and ever-growing tech company. So he's really got his finger on the pulse of modern 21st century Dublin, which I think puts him in a good place to engage with the big topics in everyone's on people's minds. So Steve, over to you. It gives us great pleasure to hear what you're going to say to us next.
Thank you, Pat and Isaac, and thank you, Katie, for sharing, and thank you, everyone, for coming. And please do add your questions. It's lovely to be here again. So yeah, no question is too simple, no question is too feisty. Put them in, and we'll look at it at the end. Is there hope in a time of fear and uncertainty? For those of you that have watched the film or read the Tolkien book, The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, you'll know that one of the central themes that is developed is the theme of hope. And right at the end of the film, this is brilliantly portrayed, where we have Sam and Frodo. And Frodo is rapidly losing hope that the journey will finish, that they'll destroy the ring, and that darkness and evil will be conquered. And so Sam, his good friend, starts reminiscing about the stories that they learned back as Hobbit, when they were young hobbits, and stories that they'd come to love and believe in, and stories that inspired them to hope. And this is how the conversation goes, and I quote, Sam says, "Those were the stories that stayed with you, that meant something, even if you're too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, that I do understand. Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going because they were holding on to something." Frodo says, "What are we holding on to, Sam?" Sam replies that there is some good in this world and it's worth fighting for. That's the power of hope. And you know what? Even as I read it and I watched the film many times, I get goose pimples. Because you and I and every human heart in this world wants that to be true. We want to know there's something to hold on to. We want to know that there's something worth fighting for. We don't want to give up. We want to know that the light is going to cancel out the darkness. And more than ever, for this present generation, which has been very isolated from much trauma in the West anyway, we are now having to face an issue where we could give in to hopelessness, and we're desperate to find hope. Because many of the things we used to find hope in, well, they're not certain anymore, are they? Financial prosperity, physical health, continual progress, societal order, a future that you can plan and control like your wedding day, a long life of happiness. You can't guarantee any of those right now. None of us can guarantee any of those right now. So can we find hope in this time of fear and uncertainty? And I want to do two things. I did this last time. I want to compare and contrast the secular view of hope, that if you get rid of God, what kind of hope are you really left with? Is there hope? What can you hold on to? As Sam says to Frodo. And then the Christian view of hope. And as Katie has personally testified to, the resources that are available to the Christian, that you have something to hold on, even if it's uncertainty, and even if there's fear, and even if your loved ones die. And like last time, I want to give an intellectual answer as I compare and contrast the views. I don't want to belittle or condemn. I just want to compare and contrast and try and provoke questions. But I also want to give a personal answer, because depending on where you're coming from and why you've joined, and thank you for joining, you may be going, I want to know the intellectual answer here, or I want to know the personal, and I want to try and answer both. So let's start with the intellectual answer. The secular view of hope is that humanity will progress. I'm here relying on a Christian thinker that some of you will know called Tim Keller, and his book, Making Sense of God, and a recent talk he gave from the book. A great book, I suggest you get it. In it, he quotes Robert Nisbet, a very famous book from the 1980s called History of the Idea of Progress. And Nisbet, I don't believe is a believer or anything, or not that I know of, but he compares all the ancient peoples, the Babylonians, the Chinese, the Hindus, the Greeks, everyone in fact. And he says, everyone in the ancient world thought time and history was cyclical. It wasn't going anywhere. Some civilizations and cultures actually thought, no, history is going declining. And the Greeks potentially held on to this idea that if thought could progress, society could progress. But on the whole, there wasn't an idea of progress in the ancient world until Christianity came along, and the idea of the kingdom of God would come, and the idea that history is no longer cyclical and going nowhere or declining, but history is actually going somewhere and has a future, and and society can progress along a positive line. So that was the view for most of the 1500 years, post 1600 years after Jesus, that Christianity had brought this idea of hope, of a forward momentum to history. Then what happened in 1950, and there was different earthquakes and natural disasters and the Enlightenment and all the rest, belief in God began to decline. And Europe became more secular, rejected the idea of God, but they kept the idea of progress and the idea of hope that they got from the Bible. And philosophers started to talk about humanity progressing, more technology, more industry, more knowledge, more finance. We're going somewhere. We don't need God. We can do it without God. And of course, Darwin comes along and says, we're evolving. The stronger are getting stronger and the weak are getting siphoned off. So we are progressing as a humanity. And so the idea that you could find hope, you could progress without God became a very real idea to people. And then the 20th century hit. And there was a horrendous 30 to 50 years. Horrendous. 1914, World War, 40 million people killed. 1918, the Spanish flu, this great pandemic that we're now relearning about, estimates 50 million people killed, 1918. 1930, the Great Depression, the GDP decline of 27%, unemployment of 25%. 1939, World War II, 75 million people killed. In that 30 to 50 year period, ideas of hope, societal progress, the world is going somewhere, fell on hard times. But were any of you around, maybe one or two, I doubt it though, in 1940 at the end of the Second World War, 1941? We don't know that time of catastrophe. We've never experienced it. And so the secular idea of progress and hope has had a resurgence and a revival. 9/11 shook our world a bit. Yeah, we had a depression, a crash in 2008, but it was 1% GDP decline, not 25 or 27%. We've never had anything like what they had at the start of the 20th century. But then recently, we've started to experience some real suffering. The pandemic, of course, but also environmental crisis, global warming, the pollution of our oceans, David Attenborough and all that. We're suddenly going, wait a minute, we're ruining our world. We're not progressing it. There's rogue states, there's terrorists who want to kill and create havoc, and we don't know how to stop them. Technology, we're progressing, but we're creating a monster. The surveillance state, fake news, we're undermining democracy. Who can we trust anymore? There's a sort of like, is our world really progressing, or is it getting all out of control and are we destroying it? Suicide and depression rates up. The need for counselors has never been greater. What about the arts? You always see in the arts, don't you, film, literature, poems, what's really going on in our society. What have been some of the recent big hits on the TV? House of Cards, Mad Men, Breaking Bad, if you're from an Irish context and you're not too old, Love, Hate. Those shows have no sense of hope and progress. They're actually characterized by anti-heroes, not heroes. No righteous, no light conquering darkness. Darkness conquers all. There's no sense of progress. You have nothing to cheer for. Lies, deception, power, abuse, evil, darkness. What's going on? It's a symptom that our society is losing hope, and the arts are representing that. Why? What's gotten into the secular idea of human progress? Well, two things. There's two big problems with the secular idea of progress: the problem of human nature and the problem of ultimate oblivion. You see, if you get rid of God and you say, look, human nature, the society is just going to progress and progress and progress, what do you do with Auschwitz? What do you do with Auschwitz? The secular idea of hope and progress said, as we increase in knowledge, as we increase in technology, as we increase in industry, we will use technology and knowledge and our industry for good. But we haven't always, have we? We assumed that as knowledge increased, our moral compass would stay on track. But we don't use knowledge, power, and finance for other people's good so often. Here you have a leader called Hitler, who's very wealthy, who's aiming to progress society by killing off a weaker race in his eyes, and he's using the latest technology to slaughter them. Now, of course, we have to have an answer for this. There's a liberal answer. The liberal answer goes like this. People who commit great crimes in life were victims of unjust social structures. Bad family upbringing, tough school environment, deprived backgrounds. The Nazis did bad things because bad things were done to them. You can't say that, can you? You trivialize the suffering. You take away what it really is evil, as evil. You can't say they were victims of unjust social structures and that justifies the 6 million Jews dying. No. Well, then you go to the conservative answer. No, 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 no. Those Nazis were just terrible people, awful people, evil people, not like they were subhuman. Subhuman? What have you just done? You've just started to wipe out a race. Isn't that what the Nazis were doing? You've become the oppressor. You now think you have a right to cut them off and to say we should just banish them. You're now the Nazi. You've denied the common humanity that can turn every one of us into an oppressor. First answer, liberal answer, Nazis couldn't help it. Trivializes it. You can't say that. Second answer, the Nazis are subhuman. Oh, you're then committing the same crime they've committed. What's the right answer? Well, the Christian answer is that in every single one of us is the ability to do such horrendous things. The evil lies within. The Bible calls it sin. We're warped on the inside. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, if that's how you pronounce his name, in his book Gulag Archipelago, talks about life in the Gulag, the communist Soviet forced labor camps. And he puts it like this, very famous quote: "The line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts." So the secular idea of progress didn't take into account the problem of human nature, the problem of the human heart. We are not morally good species. And so as we progress, we don't use our progress always for good. So in the end, we can bring great harm. War, we kill each other. Our environment, we destroy it. Ourselves, we become addicts of different things. And there's division, isn't there, in our society? Isn't COVID-19 revealing all the cracks, racial, geographical, political, economic differences in our world? Are we progressing? But there's another problem, and that's the problem of total oblivion. The secular view always says, well, humanity is always progressing, you know? We're moving forward, we're going somewhere. We don't need God, we've got somewhere to go, we have our own hope. We're all here by accident, there's no supernatural, there's no life after death. Wait a minute, where are we going? To total oblivion? The sun will collapse and the world will cease to exist. The death of the sun will mean the death of all civilization. We are progressing towards total oblivion. That is the secular view of hope. I don't get much hope from eternal nothingness. I mean, why does it matter what I do now? Should I live good or bad? Should I do evil or be benevolent? I mean, does it matter? Yeah, okay, 70 years on earth, if I'm given them, I might be able to make some good in my life. But like eternal nothingness is what's going to happen. Our lives are an insignificant blip. Is that really a hopeful, how do I have hope? COVID-19, what is it that we really fear? What causes so much uncertainty in us? Well, Katie, and God bless her, was so good. I mean, death of our loved ones. One person put it like this: what makes you rush around in panic? What fills you with fear? What are the worst case scenarios that play out in your head? What does it look like? And he said, ultimately, it's always death. Health and safety, despairs of aging, fear of losing loved ones. It's just an underlying fear of death. So Bertrand Russell, I quoted him last time, famous atheist philosopher from the previous generation, said, we are all destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system, and all man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. Oh, what great hope. Carl Jung, let's move from philosophy to psychology. Death is indeed a fearful piece of brutality. There's no sense pretending otherwise. It is brutal, not only as a physical event, but far more so psychically. A human being is torn away from us, and what remains is the icy stillness of death. That there no longer exists any hope of a relationship, for all bridges have been smashed at one blow. This is the view you have to have if you've got rid of God and supernatural and life after death. Is my idea of progress? Well, it ends up in nothing. So John Lennox, who has written a book, a 70-page book, I recommend you buy it if you're interested in this. Where is God in a Coronavirus World? He's a professor at Oxford. Removing God from the equation does not remove the pain and suffering. It leaves it untouched. But removing God does remove something else, namely any kind of ultimate hope. In other words, if this life is all there is when you die, you rot, there's no greater story, there's no meta-narrative, there's no afterlife, we're all here by chance, okay, I can make the most of my life now. But hope, progress, it's ultimate oblivion for me, for my loved ones, for all civilization. No wonder society's running out of hope. No wonder the arts are making TV shows with anti-heroes where darkness conquers the light. That's the logical outworking of getting rid of God. So they're the two challenges to the secular view of hope, that we're going to progress, the problem of human nature, the problem of ultimate oblivion. But we need something to fight for, don't we? Like Sam says to Frodo. In another famous book from the Holocaust, Viktor Frankl, again, not a Christian believer, in his classic The Man's Search for Meaning, in his classic tribute to hope from the Holocaust, sold more than 12 million copies since first published in Germany in 1946. He was one of the world's leading psychiatrists of his day, and he spent 3 years of his life in 4 different concentration camps. And the book is a meditation of meaning and finding inner reasons of hope to survive the atrocities. It's a fantastic read. At one point in his book, he says this: the prisoner who had lost faith in the future, his future, was doomed. Woe to him who saw no sense in this life, no aim, no purpose, therefore no point in carrying on. He was soon lost. The typical reply with which such a man rejected all encouraging arguments was, I have nothing to expect from life anymore. Frankl, who's tried to act as a psychiatrist in the camps, said this: what sort of answer can one give to that? In other words, there is no hope now for that person. And he explains that many in the Holocaust who did find hope had to turn back to their belief in God or something else. So what's the Christian answer? How do we find hope? And how does Jesus' resurrection particularly, which is unique to Christianity, this idea of resurrection, give us something, a resource in a time of uncertainty and fear? I want to read from one of my favorite passages in the Bible. It's when Jesus encounters Mary Magdalene after he's been risen from the grave 3 days after his crucifixion. The story goes like this. Now Mary stood outside the tomb weeping. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw 2 angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, woman, why are you crying? They have taken my Lord away, she said, and I don't know where they have put him. At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize it was Jesus. He asked her, woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for? Thinking he was the gardener, she said, sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him and I will get him. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned towards him and cried out in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. Jesus said, do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, I've seen the Lord. And she told them that he had said these things to her. I want to say 3 things very briefly about Christian hope from this passage and from the resurrection. Christian hope is concrete, it is beautiful, and it's guaranteed. Firstly, it's concrete. Here you have a physical man with a physical woman in a physical garden. This is written by John, a Jewish man. If you're a Jew, a physical man, a physical woman in a physical garden, you think straight away to when God created the heavens and the earth, the Garden of Eden, and a man and a woman he put in it there. And it's as if God is back in the resurrection, saying this world got off track and I'm back to recreate what was lost. A beautiful, physical, concrete world which you can enjoy and develop. And in a sense, when Mary thinks Jesus is the gardener, she's right. God is back as a gardener, creating this world again. The old world is going to pass away and a new world, the new Eden, is coming. And so the Bible promises that heaven is not an immaterial spiritual paradise removed from this world. That's what we often think of it. At the end of history, the last book of the Bible says that we do not ascend into heaven, but heaven's glorifying power and beauty and love descend into the material world and get rid of all the evil, suffering, aging, disease, poverty, injustice, and pain. So we not only look forward to the resurrection of our souls, but the resurrection of our bodies. It's a physical, concrete world. So did you notice Mary says to Jesus, and Jesus says to Mary, do not hold on to me. She's holding on to a physical Jesus. There's no sense of sexual innuendo here. It's just a woman who's captivated by the beauty of a physical resurrection and the person that she wants to follow. So heaven is the redemption and renewal of everything in this world, not destruction or exit from it. So Christian hope is concrete. We're looking forward to a new heavens and a new earth when all the brokenness of this world will be purified and the old garden will be back, in a sense. Secondly, it is beautiful. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean, Katie's story is so helpful for us. What really matters in your life? Like, really, what do you matter? I mean, it's loved ones. That's why we fear death, because we're separated from loved ones. Here Mary's back with the one she loves. All the joy and the wonder, this unimaginable beauty of knowing Jesus and the resurrected Jesus. And that's what we want. In our deepest desires, we say, I hope I can live. We kind of pretend we are. We're living in a world where our loved ones don't die, a world of beauty where we can know our loved ones forever. So Jesus says to Mary, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father. Astonishing. My God and your God. In other words, Jesus is saying, what has happened to me and will happen when I ascend back to heaven can happen to you too. It's my Father and your Father. We're part of the same family now, Mary, if you believe in me. You can join me in an eternal community of love and joy. And so elsewhere in the New Testament, Jesus is described as the first fruits of a harvest. And we are those that believers in Jesus are the rest of the harvest. And he shows us that it's a physical, concrete, and beautiful world of love. Now, Howard Thurman was a mentor to Martin Luther King, an American African scholar at Boston University. And he gave a famous lecture at Harvard in 1947 on the meaning of African-American spirituality. He engaged the criticism that the African-American spirituals, you know, the gospel songs and all the rest, were too otherworldly, too many references to heaven and to crowns and to robes and to thrones. You know, we get those images in the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible. And when Jesus returns, this is what we're going to receive. And in the lecture, he answers the objection when he says, no, the African-American slaves, you know, in the 19th century slave trade, they took those images very seriously and believed that they would one day be crowned in robes and glory. And obviously the liberal scholars at Harvard said, oh, they're just symbolic. It's, you know, it's just too otherworldly, you know. And Thurman, he says, imagine it. Imagine going to someone who'd been a slave all their life. And you say, listen, there's no life after death. There's no ultimate judgment. There's no rewards. None of your desires that you haven't managed to be fulfilled are ever going to be fulfilled. The best we can do for is improving social policy in this world. So, you know, keep that in mind. Go out there, keep your head high as a slave. You know, have courage and love. Don't despair. And Thurman says, what ridiculous ideas. The reason the slaves were so resilient and sang about Jesus and all the robes and all the crowns and all that is because they knew that it was a physical, concrete, beautiful world that they would inherit, and this world would be smothered up by it, and all their pain and suffering as slaves would one day be put into perspective. A world of beauty, a world of joy, a world of glory, a world of rewards was coming their way. That's why they had resilience. Christian hope is concrete. Christian hope is beautiful as we live in a world with our loved ones forever. And finally, Christian hope is guaranteed. What do I mean by that? Well, remember the two challenges to the secular worldview of hope and progress, the problem of human nature? Well, that's been dealt with. That's what the cross of Christ is all about. Jesus saying, I'm dealing with the problem of the human heart, the sin and the evil, and I'm giving you a new start, a new heart. And the problem of total oblivion, that we go into eternal nothingness, well, he rises from the dead. He's beaten death. Death no longer has us hold on us. Just as a creditor's power is broken when someone pays our debt in full, so death's claim and power over us has been broken as Jesus died in our place, paying our penalty, and rising again, which showing that we too can live an immortal life of love and beauty, the new heavens and the new earth. But here's my point when I say guaranteed. It's not an idea. It's not a theory of make-believe. It's not wishful thinking. It's guaranteed. How? How is it guaranteed? My hope for the future is grounded in a historic event in the past. And history cannot change. So if Jesus rose from the dead in history, and that is the guarantor of my future hope, then because history cannot change, my future is guaranteed. You see, we can put our hope in all kinds of things: so relationship, sex, finance, academia, work, family, popularity, a comfortable life, the secular idea of human progress, civilization. But none of that is certain. I don't know if those things are going to happen. Something might change, another virus. You might change, we might. But the Christian hope says, no, our hope is not based on something in the present. It's based on something in the past that is never going to change. No matter what the present holds, the future is certain. And so our hope as Christians can become unbreakable. Now, you might say, and you probably will, and I hope you ask your questions, well, how do I know if Jesus rose from the dead? Okay, nice theory. Joining the dots between an immovable fact of history means an immovable fact in the future. I like your thinking, Steve, but how do I know if Jesus rose from the dead? Good question. We've got a question time for that. I'm not going to, but here's one answer. Mary. If you were making up a story just because you wanted to believe something about someone who died and you're very sad about it, that's the kind of, you have to have some kind of alternative answer to the resurrection. The disciples were crestfallen and despairing, and they needed something to hope in, so they made up a story. And you never put Mary, certainly not a shady woman like Mary Magdalene, we know she was a bit of a shady past, as the person who first hears from Jesus after the resurrection. As scandalous as it is for our modern ears, women didn't have a place in a court of law. Their voice wouldn't have counted. Their witness wouldn't have counted. In fact, it would have undermined the story. You'd only do that if it was true. And that's just one of many little incidental points to say this isn't a made-up myth. This has the ring of truth. And I guess for the question time, if you don't think Jesus rose from the dead, what is your explanation for the birth of the church, for the 4 accounts we have in the Gospels, for disciples who fearlessly made known the good news of Jesus in the face of death, for the worldview change in so many of the Jewish and the Greek people at the time to start believing in resurrection? Yeah, how do you account for those things? What's your alternative? The fact that no body was ever produced, the Romans and the Jews couldn't stand, the fact that this idea that Jesus was risen, but they never produced a body to disprove it. How do you account for that if you don't believe he rose? That's the key question. So Christian hope is not wishful thinking. It's guaranteed. Our hope for the future is based on an immovable fact in history. And we too can live in a concrete world of unimaginable beauty and joy with our loved ones that also know Jesus. That is what gave resilience and love and hope to those African-American slaves and to many more people. Can we find hope in a in a time of fear and uncertainty? If you get rid of God, how do you find it? I don't know. I'm not trying to belittle. I don't know. It's total oblivion is the answer, is what happens. But if Jesus rose from the dead, this world is not the end. I have resources at my disposal that I can say, I want society to progress as much as it can now. I want to give myself to the flourishing of this world now, regardless of the consequences to me, because I have a hope for the future. Let me finish with this. Mary had lost hope, hadn't she? She was crying. The angels say, why are you crying? Jesus says, why are you crying? She's desperate. She's like Katie in the story, crying at the grieving at the death of a loved one. She didn't know what the future held. Do you know, so much of what we have hope for as a society has been taken away. We're like Mary in the garden. They've taken him away. They've taken the things I hope for away, and I don't know where my future lies now. What changes Mary? What brings her back? Did you notice? Jesus said, Mary. He called her name. For everyone on this call who's a Christian, for Katie, for the panel, for myself, for the slaves back in the 19th century, the moment Jesus says your name, Steve, Mary, it changes everything. You can face things when you know that the creator of the universe, the one that has died in your place, has risen from the dead and says your name. And maybe COVID-19, if I can end on this personal note, maybe COVID-19 has unblocked your ears and you can hear him calling your name. Give in to him and find a hope, a future, a world of unimaginable joy and beauty and love. Find a strength, find a peace, but you have to give in to him. Maybe COVID-19 has unblocked your ears, opened up your heart that you might receive him. Thanks for listening. No question is too feisty, no question is too simple. I'm going to hand back to Pat and Isaac.
Steve, Thank you so much, guys. I don't know about you, I really enjoyed that. And so there's so much stuff to kind of unpack and think about. So guys, I really hope that you are sending your questions in. No question is too simple. No question is too feisty. So we're about to head into our Q&A now. So just to introduce you to the panelists, of course, you now know Steve, you know Katie. If you remember Rebecca Sharp, she was on it last time as well. And so she's here. She's a law student at Trinity. And then we're also it gives me a lot of joy to introduce someone new, my cousin Lena Tice. And yeah, again, she's also studying at UCD, studying economics. And actually she's, very well qualified to be speaking about uncertainty and fear right now. She was supposed to be going to the Olympics, no less, this summer, playing hockey for Ireland. And of course, as you guys all know, that stuff has also been cancelled. So of course, she's now finding herself in this 4-year cycle of uncertainty and fear as well. So great to have her along with us as well. Right, let's get going.
Great. Well, Steve, I'm going to turn straight to you first of all, because we've had a good punchy question and I think it should be addressed. Here's the question, or roughly put in question form. You said that if you call a Nazi subhuman, then you're committing the same crime they did. Well, that rings a few alarm bells, because surely being responsible for the death of millions and millions across Europe is a little bit different to making an intellectual judgment.
Yeah, and in that sense, I completely agree. But you're committing the same internal mistake that they committed. So, because you're making that judgment of writing someone off, and you now become an oppressor, where you can basically say, I have the right to say that those people who do that are not really worthy of living. And you may not carry it out, but you've committed the same mental internal process. And so in that sense, you're on the same trajectory, in the same category as them. That's what Alexander Solzhenitsyn said. It's running for all of our human hearts. We're all capable of this. And, Jesus famously said, when you look at a woman lustfully, it's like committing adultery. When you get angry for unrighteous reasons, it's as if you're murdering someone. So there's a sense in which it starts in the heart. And I'm very grateful that a lot of our heart doesn't get out into society in the way that it did with Hitler. But I think the point of that the psychologists would say is, yeah, but the same heart is there. If it had the right steering and opportunity, you never know. And by the way, just at a small level, haven't you sometimes been really disturbed at some of the things that you do or say, and you're like, oh, I didn't think that could come out of me, and that, and it may not have been killing people, but you suddenly go, whoa, that came from me. And there's a sense in which, well, imagine if that was magnified a bit with a bit of pressure on the side, kind of thing. So yeah, point taken. I'm not putting you literally in the same category as Hitler, saying you're as morally culpable as him, but you're committing the same error. So that answer to Hitler is not sufficient, because you're answering him with his answer, which is you're not, well, why does Hitler do that? Because he's a subhuman. Oh, that's what he did. So the answer needs to be more robust than that. Yeah,
I hear that. So there's a certain irony, because you're sharing the same intellectual common ground with the very people we despise and trying to dismiss them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear that, and that's a helpful clarification that we're not completely catastrophizing the situation. So thank you, Steve. That's really good. Right, these questions came in, I think, before we got into your third and final point about the resurrection. And a few came in. I'm going to sort of group them together and paraphrase with one. How are you able to hold on to hope in something you cannot see? Now, some of you might want to talk about the resurrection. Some of you panelists might want to talk about more personal experience, what have you. But it's been great talking about hope. But how can we hold on to it if we can't see it? Are there any panelists that want to jump in on that one, or more than one, perhaps? My sister's trying to jump in, but we can't hear you, Lena.
Yeah, I was told to make sure I unmuted myself before I started speaking. But yeah, I'll jump in first, and then I'm sure one or two of you will follow me. But yeah, I mean, I think the first thing a lot of people have asked me this question before, and the first thing I tend to ask them is, well, what is the alternative? And Steve already sort of touched on that. I know it's a hope, perhaps, that you can't physically see, reach out, grab onto, but the alternative seems pretty hopeless to me. And then furthermore, on from that, I think about, okay, well, this guy Jesus, he actually is a historical character. he's not just a made up dude. Like he's a historical character. And I think something that has really, really struck me, especially in this time of quarantine where I've kind of been battling with things, is the thing of prophecy. And someone showed me a passage in Isaiah, which is an Old Testament book. And this was written 700 years, I think, Pat, you can correct me, before like Jesus' death on the cross. And it says, surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. And this was written so long before Jesus actually died on the cross. And it absolutely blew my mind. And I think I know we can't reach out and grab it now, but this guy Jesus really did live. I can't see him now, but he really did live. And he said that we have a hope, and it was pointed to hundreds of years before it actually happened. So that's my 2 cents, but someone else go on and jump in now if you want to.
Thanks, Lena. Thanks very much. Any other panelists want to hop in and add to that? How can you hope in something you can't see?
Yeah, I think what Lena said was absolutely bang on, and it just adding to that, and also in thinking of a different thing, like there's actually a lot of things that I put my faith in or sort of hope in that I can't see. I've actually never seen gravity, and yet I know it's there. And how do I know it's there? Well, I place my hope in these scientists who do these calculations to work out that all these things exist. And yet what I find odd is that, so for me, you know, I find it strange. People are so willing to put their faith and their hope in these scientists who are, don't get me wrong, super intelligent, super academic people with wealths of knowledge that I will never have. But a lot of times science doesn't have all the answers. It's actually, throughout history, it's been like disproved, and they're always like finding new things and adding to those things. And so then if it's preposterous for you to place hope in Christianity, which basically says let's believe in this God who is all-knowing, who is all-powerful, well then how is that any different to the hope I place in people who are finite people who will one day die in comparison to an infinite God who's supposed to be all-knowing? I just don't understand how you could reconcile those two things. And so therefore I think it's equally as preposterous to put your hope and take that leap of faith in something that has doubts, that's of a human standard compared to of an infinite God standard.
Thanks, Becky. Steve, is there anything you want to add to draw that together, or should we move?
Very helpful. I just, there was a famous bunch of people in the 1920s called the logical positivists, and they try to show that we shouldn't believe in anything unless you could prove it by empirical evidence. You know, I think the question is, can't see it, I can't touch it. You know, if we can't get at it, the 5 senses, or you can't prove it logically, like 2 + 2 = 4. So unless it can be improved by, you know, scientific investigation, touch, sight, or unless it can be proved tautologically by logic that, you know, 2 + 2 = 4, or bachelors are unmarried and all the rest, then you can't prove it. And it basically fell on hard ground for 2 reasons. That idea that, well, if I can't see it, why do I, you know, first of all, can the principle itself be verified by science or logic? No. So the principle is self-defeating. But secondly, I think this is Rebecca's point, you know, beauty, love. You can see demonstrations of it, and I can come to that. I think we can see demonstrations of Christian hope, whether it's in the history of Jesus or in the lives transformed today or whatever. But the point is, you can't measure those things. You can't get at them in the same way. Morality, you know, all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of things that we can't prove and touch, but we know are real and important. In fact, the most real important things to our life we can't prove and touch: love and beauty and truth and things. So I think it's a more of a level playing field in that sense.
Thanks, guys. That was great. And I think perhaps the most glaring one of all is we all believe, well, I would assume we all believe that the world is spinning at thousands of kilometers per hour, and it's also going around the universe at thousands of kilometers per hour. So we are currently, every one of us, moving very, very, very fast through the universe. And none of us can touch, hear, smell, or taste, or no less feel that. And yet well, I certainly believe it's happening, and I'm sure 99.9% of people these days do as well. So perhaps there is a world that exists beyond our senses, and that perhaps is no less true for this figure of Jesus Christ. And I guess, well, and this is where we're going to move forward into, is the evidence there? Does it exist in the Bible? If we dig deep, will we find credible things? How do we grapple with ideas of prophecy, resurrection, miracles, etc.? And perhaps we'll head into that in due course. Another good question, it's similar and linked, is how do you respond to those who say Christianity is a coping mechanism? Similarly, similar sort of question that came in is, if heaven, you've admitted in your talk, heaven is a social construct, I guess, is heaven just a social construct? Similar thing, right? Karl Marx very famously called Christianity the opium of the people. Is Christianity just the opium of the people? Is it something we've created to make people feel better about themselves, and it's particularly productive in oppressed people groups who don't have much else to hope for? Is it the opium of the people? Does anyone want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think maybe in focusing on the first bit of that, the first question there, I would point to the example of the disciples. So Jesus's followers, they were willing to die horrific deaths because they were so committed and had such faith that Jesus really was the Son of God, that he was who he claimed to be. So I think that's not just something that existed back then, but that is something that is still true today, that there are people who are willing to give up their lives for this hope, for this faith that we're talking about tonight. And that's, there's millions of things about the persecuted church and the underground churches, particularly in Asia and those countries, of people who are just willing to do anything for the cause. And I don't think you would do that if you were just so like disillusioned, I suppose. And then secondly, there's a brilliant moment. I don't know the year or who the person was, but it's in the Olympics, and basically the guy's running like the 200 meters, and then the last bit he like pulls his hamstring, and everyone's just like, this is the worst moment ever, and everyone's like heartbroken. And then his father, who's like sitting in the audience, bursts through the crowd, pushes past the security guards, and goes onto the track and like lifts his son up, and then runs with his son to the finish line. And so that would be my personal response to what how I feel when there's times where I've had hardships, or I felt disappointment, or I felt fear, or I felt uncertainty, or I've grieved, or I felt loss or disappointment, that like the father in the Olympics, that pushes past, God doesn't just, merely help us a little bit. He's the person that picks us up and helps us finish. He is the person who brings us over the line when we actually don't have the strength to. And I know to maybe a lot of people, that's very much an experience that I've had. And I know from what Katie shared as well earlier, that was where she really found her hope, that God really brought her through those times. And even though the grieving was tough and the grieving was painful, she knew that she had that hope. And I would just really encourage you guys to think about that, and to think about where does our hope come from tonight, and what we've talked about.
Thanks, Becca. Great, let's keep pressing on. We've had many really great questions coming in. Please keep them coming. We hope to get to as many of them as possible. We're talking about faith. Of course, Christianity is not by no means the only global faith. There's many other faiths. There's many other religions, and whatever name you want to give to ideologies that believe in some sort of higher power that brings hope. So I guess the question is, are all these faiths the same? If they all point towards some final hope, are they all the same? How do we weigh up the differences between them? So are they all the same? And if not, are you then having the audacity to say that all other faiths are wrong? Does anyone want to jump in on that? Oh my word, she's not getting the hang of the muting thing. There we go.
I'll jump in quickly. Again, this is probably something I've had a few conversations around, and it's a difficult one sometimes to talk about. But I suppose the short answer is, as a Christian, no, I don't think that, you know, all religions believe in the same God. And I do think that the God we believe in is the one and the only God. And that's a difficult one to hear. But I suppose let's take like two of the biggest sort of world religions. The first one that springs to mind is Islam, and then obviously Christianity. And a lot of people would say, well, I mean, you know, they're different religions, but ultimately it's just the same God. And I guess I really wouldn't agree with that. And I think a few reasons why. Firstly, is Muslims say, Islam says that, you know, there is no God but one, and they think that Christianity is polytheistic because we have a Father, Son, and a Holy Spirit. And although we know that that's 3 in 1, and probably the Trinity is a topic for another day, straight away that's a really contrasting view. And presents a few issues if you're going to say we believe in the same God. The second thing, I suppose, is this idea of as Christians, we believe that we're saved by grace, and it's an idea of grace receiving rather than law keeping. And I'm reading a really interesting book called No God But One, Allah or Jesus, and I'm not here to debate Islam and Christianity, but just quickly, Islam is based around law keeping, and that is how you earn your way into paradise, whereas Christianity is very much based around grace receiving. And so right there at the heart of the two religions, there is a conflict and a difference. And I suppose we could probably find real huge differences like these when we compare Christianities to many, many religions. So for me, for someone to say that, you know, all religions are just believing in the same God, you know, I'd really have to disagree. So anyone else can jump in.
Just to, that's very helpful, Lena. Thank you. I love these questions, guys. And sorry, I know you probably want some back and forth. I just try to put in the chat pane. If there's something we miss of a question or there's like a pushback, then please come back in. I know it's tricky. Every one of us is being exclusive. Every one of us is saying someone at some point is wrong and right and whatever. So no one can get past exclusivity. There's no one that's truly inclusive, because you'll find people in the world that you disagree with. And so everyone is being exclusive. And to say someone else is wrong doesn't mean to judge them. To say I disagree with you doesn't mean that I'm judging you. I just disagree with you. Like otherwise we can't have intellectual discussion. So we all have to accept that every one of us is being exclusive at some point. We're saying that's right, that's wrong, I agree, you know, this is what I believe, this is what you believe. And we must have the intellectual courtesy and credibility to say, for me to disagree is not to judge. So in that sense, we're all in the same boat again. It's a level playing field. And so the question, yes, and the Christian answer to the question is yes. I guess we believe Jesus is the only way to God, and the other religions believe their own version, and that's fine. And we can debate the merits and the truthfulness of all those things. But then a second question comes, which I guess is maybe behind the question, which is, how do you have a worldview where you say, I think you're wrong, but I'm going to love you regardless? And I guess that's also a resource Christianity gives you to say, like, I actually think you're wrong here, but my belief is that I was wrong and God loved me. And so I have no reason to judge you. In no way I can do that. I can only show you my love, even in our disagreement. So we have to look at the differences, compare and contrast. I think this idea of law keeping, grace receiving is super. And that's the uniqueness of Christianity. But I also want to say we're all doing it. We're all exclusive. To disagree is not to judge. So how do we disagree and still love? In the Christian view, that's what we receive from God. We were wrong and he loved us. So that's what we can give to other people. We don't therefore have to judge or stand in above people. Maybe Christians do, but in principle, we should have a humility about us. And if we don't, forgive us. So that's we're not perfect. So that's something else I might bring to the table.
Sorry, can I just add something there, Steve? I'm just thinking, like, if you think about, there are like Jews and different branches of Christianity that don't necessarily follow the direct outline of the Christianity that we would practice in our church. So I'm kind of thinking, are our Bible says that our God is a just God. And whether that means that us as Christians can't say whether Jews are saved or Muslims are saved or Islam's are saved, what we can trust is that God knows that, and God has that figured out. We don't need to worry about that. What we know as Christians is that we are saved, but we can also trust in this justness and this sovereignty that God calls himself to be. So if that is a concern for people about Islam and Muslim, we as Christians can definitely look to the Bible and be like, God knows what he's doing with that. So just thought that was something to add as well.
Thank you, Katie. Let's keep pressing on. I think, if I may add, just in many ways, the key fulcrum of discussion when I find myself engaging with many of my friends who are of different faiths is this historical figure of Jesus Christ. Is I find myself asking, what do you guys make of this figure, Jesus Christ? And I find them asking, how can you justify what you believe about Jesus Christ? And some of the questions coming in are also honing in on this historical figure of Jesus Christ and how we can take him seriously and how we can take the Bible seriously. Great questions and really good thing to hone in on. So here's one question here. Good question. If the disciples were willing to die, why did Peter deny him? Why did Judas betray him? Why did Thomas need proof? If they were all willing to die for him, as perhaps we've said a few times this evening, how come, well, 3 of them were clearly having trouble? And at the same time, aren't there loads of characters throughout history that people have been willing to die for? Anyone want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I can say something on that. So Peter was willing to, he turned away from Jesus, he denied Jesus 3 times. Judas obviously betrayed him for money, and Thomas was like the key guy in the Bible who's renowned for doubting that Jesus fulfilled his promise of rising from the cross again. And so yes, they were willing to die for Jesus, but at the same time they were humans, and Jesus is the only one in the Bible and the only one who can truly be said to be perfect and not full of sin. And that is what makes Jesus so different. And that's why it's amazing that Jesus died for each and every individual one of us. And that's why his death counts the most. Yes, the disciples were willing to die for Jesus, just like we have seen like in China and in Korea, how Christians nowadays are still willing to die for God and for their faith, yet that still doesn't take away from their flaws as a human. And I'm sure many of us, and I know I certainly have, and many of those martyrs that we know have denied God in some shape or form, haven't stood up for the faith that they believe in when they feel they should have. And so my answer to that would be, yes, they did have a faith, but they were also human, and they also still had that sin in them that led them to do these things. But the most important thing about that is God forgave them, and God forgives us, and God forgave Peter denying him and Thomas doubting, and so yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. That's really good. And if I can just slightly add to that, I think it's a good point that's made about Thomas and Peter, because what we see with Thomas and Peter is things dramatically shift the moment Jesus Christ rises from the dead. So they are very cowardly, they are very wet and meek and mild and won't stand up to anyone. And then Jesus Christ rises from the dead, and suddenly there is this absolutely remarkable shift in their personalities and the personalities of most of the other early followers of Jesus Christ. In fact, it's a kind of moot point of, it's remarkable. If you read the 4 Gospels, particularly Mark's Gospel is basically a commentary up until Jesus rises from the dead about how foolish and how wet and soft Peter is, how time and time again he gets it wrong, he stuffs up, and he has no courage, and he's completely scared and can't get it right. And then suddenly Jesus rises from the dead, and this man, Peter, goes on to become one of the great leaders of the early church. And you have to ask yourself, why would Peter have allowed these documents to circulate underneath him that was so critical of him? Unless he clearly had this faith that, the resurrection, everything changes. And it's as if he wants to get the message out that he was once so had such little courage and was so scared and frightened, and yet he completely changed it. So clearly something shifts when Jesus rises from the dead. There's an important biblical scholar called E.P. Sanders. E.P. Sanders would have began his life as an atheist and gone into biblical research in many ways to prove the fallibility of the whole prospect of the early spread of the gospel, etc. E.P. Sanders' career begins to change as he goes on, and he begins to make some pretty telling points about the early beginnings of Christianity. And towards the end of his career, he begins to say he thinks it's utterly incontrovertible that clearly the early disciples had some experience of the resurrection, whatever that may have looked like. Eventually, the weight of evidence is just too strong, and it's very hard to join the dots from Jesus Christ's death to the rapid growth of the early church, and yet skip over this resurrection and assume it was a later fabricated myth. So things absolutely change at the resurrection. And I would plead with you guys who are listening tonight and asking these questions, get stuck into that, research that, ask questions of it. And if you're not going to believe that Jesus did rise from the dead, then please come up with a credible answer to explain how and why the church spread in the way that it did off the back of such a myth. Now, last thing I'd say is it's important to remember, and you make a really great point, the person who asked this question, that there are so many people that die for so many causes these days doesn't make it all true. As I said last week, here in Ireland, we have a long history of people dying in the name of Irish republicanism. They're willing to give up their lives for an ideology. Does that suddenly mean that we should all be die-hard Irish Republicans? Obviously not necessarily. What's unique about the early Christians is they die for historical fact. There's no other instance in history of people dying for something they actually saw. Jesus either did rise from the dead or he didn't rise from the dead. Irish republicanism, radical Islam, communism, all these other things people could have died for, you can't prove them one way or the other. You can't say, yes, this is yes or this is no. It's an idea. You either believe it to some extent or you don't. Whereas we have these men dying and women dying saying, we saw this man rise from the dead. And it's very hard to know what to do with that. Okay, let's keep cracking on, because unfortunately, Steve, or for anyone who wants to take this, but Steve, you tend to answer this question well. If anyone wants to look in and read more about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, then they have to open up the pages of the Bible. But the pages of the Bible is a book that's 2,000 years old. How can we possibly trust anything it has to say? It's so ancient and outdated. Can we trust such an ancient and outdated book? Anyone want to jump in on that? Sorry to throw that directly at Steve.
I'm happy to have a go, but someone else want to have a go? I'll pause. Happy to have a go. Just a book recommendation on the last question and this question, The Resurrection of the Son of God by N.T. Wright, a historian and theologian. And in a sense, the last question portrays the answer, which is, how do all these people change? And he says a worldview wouldn't have changed without a resurrection. It's the kind of latest big scholarly book about the worldview change at the time of that. So do read that and the historicity of the scriptures. I mean, there's so many ways you can go with this. How do you trust the Bible? The first thing I'd say is, we believe lots of things from ancient history because they were taught to us, from some people that wrote a bit after the events. Do you believe in the Roman emperors? We don't have early accounts of that. We have accounts that came a bit later. But when you look at the accounts of the New Testament and the four Gospels, they were written within 20, 30, 40 years, depending on which one. And therefore they were written within the time frame of that generation where you had hostile critics to Christianity. And they often put in names of people and things. So like even in that story there, you've got Mary Magdalene and people know her and can go and talk to her while the gospel is circulating. So we're not talking like hundreds of years after, we're talking 20, 30, 40. And then the second thing is the number of manuscripts is overwhelming compared to other ancient sources. And the more manuscripts you have, and the further those manuscripts have been distributed, in other words, they've had time to get there and they still corroborate, then the more reliable something comes. So it's how long after the event was the first documents written, how many of those documents do you have, and when do we have the earliest ones? And so for, say, many things in ancient history, it's like 1,000 years later is our first document of, say, the Roman emperors and things like that. And yet we still trust that there were Roman emperors and we've understood how history worked at that time. Tacitus and Suetonius and Josephus writing various histories, the number of copies and the distance between when they wrote and when we have our earliest copy is so so few copies and so extraordinarily long compared to Christianity, who has so many documents and so short a time. And so if you live in Ireland, in Dublin, you've got a rich blessing of the Chester Beatty Library, which I'm sure you can't access now during COVID-19, but you can go and see fragments from the 2nd century right there, little fragments. And so these are really early documents we have, not hundreds and 1,000 years later, but right back then. And there's even early hymns that are even earlier that we've got. So you have to go and do a bit of hard work. That book there is really good. I'm going to just quickly go and get 2 more books for you. A recent scholar, thank you for waiting. Can we trust the Gospels? Peter J. Williams, book on the reliability. The very famous old one is called The New Testament Documents Are They Reliable by F.O. Priest. That's more hard work and scholarly. That's more popular. Both very, very, very good. So to go and do the research, I agree with Pat. Thanks for a great question. There's clearly some challenges there we need to think through. I think there's some answers. So there's some food for thought anyway.
Great. Thank you, Steve. I think we've had a little bit of a comeback question, possibly to what one of us was saying. So let's meet it head on. Someone has texted in, great point. You can prove Muhammad as much as you can prove the resurrection of Jesus. So let me just briefly address that. That's absolutely a good point. I mean, Muhammad absolutely existed. He was undoubtedly an important historical figure. There's no doubt about that. I don't think there's even a burden of proof. Any credible historian of the first millennia would agree with that. However, it's really important to make the distinction between Muhammad and Jesus. Muhammad is emphatically clear that he is only a messenger. It is a huge crime. It's an enormous blasphemy for a Muslim to say that Muhammad is anything more than a prophet, to say anything like he's a semi-divine figure or anything close to God. That is a huge piece of blasphemy. I spent a wonderful year living in the Gambia, which is a Muslim country, and I found myself having these discussions a lot. And I made that error to say, well, to what extent do you think Muhammad is like Jesus? They are emphatically different. Jesus claims to be the Son of God, claims to be a miracle worker. Muhammad does not claim to be the same thing. Muhammad does not claim to do any miracles apart from one where he was once in a battlefield and he claims that he split the moon. And of course, that's a much harder one to verify one way or the other. However, Jesus Christ does a whole range of miracles, and all his followers say, yes, he is the so-called Son of God. He's included in this divine identity, and we saw these miracles happen. So it's a different type of proof. You're not proving with Muhammad what he did and whether he did it or not, because the claims aren't nearly as significant. Whereas for Jesus Christ, the burden of proof is, did he actually perform these miracles? If I can just give one point about his miracles, and we mentioned it last week, there's a really interesting document called the Babylonian Talmud, which is put together by a lot of Jesus's enemies, people trying to discredit him. They're actually Orthodox Jews who don't like the way he's turning the tables of their religion. And in this document, the Babylonian Talmud, there's all different attempts to discredit Jesus. And there's one little reference to his miracles, and it says, yes, he performed miracles, but it was by the power of Beelzebub, i.e. it was by the power of the devil. And in some ways, they've kind of given the game away there. Because these are his enemies who are also eyewitnesses to him, saying, sure, he did miracles, but it was by the power of the evil one, so don't follow him. Okay, so even his enemies agree that he did miracles. They're just trying to say that it was from a different source. So it is remarkable, and I think Williams will talk about this a little bit on his book on the manuscripts. It's remarkable how many different eyewitness sources talk about these miracles that he's performed. And then, we haven't even, and that's a separate point to his resurrection, to his teachings, to his prophecies, etc. So it's the collaboration of evidence around this man, Jesus Christ, which I think is pretty compelling, and I would urge you to look into.
Pat,
Right, go on, Leigh, do you want to say something?
On that, I mean, you know a lot more than me, but I found it really interesting that, the Quran really does refer to this guy, Jesus. It talks about him as well, doesn't it? Am I right?
Absolutely, yeah, it talks about the prophet Isa, very important figure.
Yeah, and it talks about him even dying, doesn't it? So even in the Quran, there is evidence for this guy Jesus. They just think he was a different character, or they
close. When
right?
it comes to his death, they believe that God provided a substitute, and Isa didn't actually have to die himself on the cross. So it's a sort of loophole. They believe there's a sort of conspiracy theory that he didn't actually die in the end. But the point is, clearly, the reputable historical fact here is that he died, and there's an attempt made in Islamic teachings to sort of get around that or work with that. But yeah, there's undoubtedly a lot of reference to this figure, Jesus Christ.
Okay, thanks, Pat.
Okay, guys, it is past. I think that we need to draw to a close. Isaac, do you think can we crack on one last question, a 2-minute?
Yeah, we'll go for it.
Yeah, guys, we've got 2 minutes. Let's give ourselves 2 minutes. One last question. It's an excellent question. And let's finish on this note. I'm so sorry if we haven't got to all your questions. Can't I just get hope in looking on the bright side, finding the silver lining? I'm an optimist. Why do I need God? Who wants to deliver the final words?
I can say something and people can add if they want.
Go ahead, Becky. Deliver the final words.
Okay. Yeah, my closing statement as the lawyer that I am. But yeah, there's 2 things I would say. Firstly, I think there's the reality of life and the reality of a broken world is sometimes you just actually can't find the silver lining. And I think that's become especially clear sometimes in the crisis they're having in COVID, where there's people grieving, there's people dying, people are looking to the future, their economies are in ruins, and there just doesn't appear to be a silver lining in that. And I think going back to what Steve said, where the real hope is in Christianity, it's actually not in this chaotic, broken world, but it's in the guarantee that one day we will be in heaven with God, where there will be no more pain, where there will be eternal joy, where there will be peace that transcends all understanding, like Katie talked about. And that's where our hope is. And yeah, just stressing that God does not leave us in our brokenness of this world. I think he still wants us to have this hope, and that's the hope that we're hoping to share with you guys tonight. And the second thing I would just say is, even if you maybe are looking at things and you can still find optimism even in the really, really tough times. I know I love getting gifts, right? I love getting gifts from, like, when someone does something really nice for you and a little surprise. And my mom or my sister will sometimes give me a gift. And the best bit about the gift is that you know who it's from. I know it's from them, and I know it's an expression of their love and care. And so when we do have all these great things, when we have this creation, when we have family, when we have relationships and friendships and all these really good things, well, they are really good, but to me, they're made so much better when I actually know who is behind them. And I believe that that is the Creator God, the God who loves us and knows us. And so I think that is the best bit about when you actually get a gift, is knowing who it's from, knowing who I can thank and knowing who I can praise in that. And for me and for all of us on this, we know that every good gift comes from our Heavenly Father. And yeah, that's me.
Becky, thank you very much. Guys, let's be respectful of time. Let's draw to a close now. I am really sorry if we haven't got to your questions. Here's what we would love to do. We would love to chat more with you one-on-one. So if you do want to chat, please get in contact with either the person who invited you, or if you found us online, please get in contact with the anonymous text message and we'll set you up with someone and we can chat one-on-one. And it's true, a Zoom chat one-on-one can be awkward for about 3 or 4 minutes, but I promise you it will get flowing and you'll find it a really fruitful, enjoyable experience. So please get in contact. We'd love to chat one-on-one. Before I hand over to Isaac, just to close us off, we are going to be weighing up whether to do one more of these events. We're going to weigh up interest levels. I think it would be great to do one more deep dive on this figure of Jesus Christ, what we can know of him, whether we can trust what he says, whether we can trust the Bible, whether he did rise from the dead, etc. More on this actual historical credibility that we've talked about. But please watch this space. So can I urge you to follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter, and to even potentially sign up for our mailing list. I'm not good at my tech, so I'll leave that to Isaac. But yeah, can I urge you to follow us and watch this space, and we might well do another event. But above all, get in contact. We'd love to chat one-on-one. Isaac.
And 100%, like, just to reiterate that, you know, I speak for myself, I speak for everyone else. I would absolutely love to be going on to a one-on-one chat with someone from this, guys. I really do enjoy it, and I think you would as well. And of course, the beauty of being in coronavirus right now is that it's all on Zoom. So if it does get too awkward, you can always just hang up. Like, who cares? You know, like, it doesn't matter. Give it a try. What else are you going to be doing? You know, even if you're a student, you can't even fall back on my exams anymore. You have one more week, I'd say, if you're at UCD until the exams are finished. So guys, please do it. I would absolutely love it. And I think you would enjoy it too. Now, guys, there are a whole bunch of other stuff to be getting involved in as well. So we are a church, Christ City Church, Dublin. Why don't you come along to church on Sunday? Again, it's on Zoom. What else are you going to be doing? You could be doing it in your bed. You can have your video off. It doesn't matter. Come along. If you think this was interesting, I implore you, please do come along. So you can find that information. Look up Christ City Church Dublin, Instagram, Twitter, online website, all of it. Look it up. Again, as well, guys, maybe why don't you come to, like, we have so many different things with our church. So again, you can see at the bottom there, we have midweek discussion groups, we have Zoom coffee chats. There's no reason to be feeling isolated right now during coronavirus. Come along and we'd love to be in contact with you. So guys, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this, and I've really enjoyed getting to hear your questions as well. So if you have more questions, why don't you get in contact with us, and we'd love to be chatting more. Well, guys, thank you very much. And I think with that, tonight, good night. Thank you very much. We are done.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you and good night. Cheers, Isaac. Thank you, Steve. Thank you all our lovely panelists. Thank you very much.